And it's another Church Solutions podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacy.
This is episode, I never say the episode, but I think it's episode 286, I think is what it is, if anybody really cares. But we've been doing this really longer than Apple did our things. We used to do video, and we're doing video today as well as audio. But we're a tech company that helps churches. Steve, how are you today?
I'm doing good.
All right, good. Glad to hear it. A little windy here in the old Pueblo.
Yes,
but we're going to
make it to close the windows.
It blew over my
office here.
It blew over my Trader grill. My grill. I was gone. I had a treadmill test today because I have a bad ticker, and I came back and my wife said the Trader grill flopped over, and so we had to like pick it up, and it's a mess. But that's how windy it was here. All right, so. I'm sure our listeners are wondering, what are we going to talk about today?
Yes. What are we talking about today?
I have no idea. No, we're going to talk about technology in the church, and we're going to, which, is a big surprise there, right? But we have a special guest today. He's an old friend of mine. It goes back many decades. His name is Dr. Rick Livingood, and Rick has been active in ministry now for, well, I won't say, but it's been a long time. He also does consulting. He works with academics. He teaches computer science at not one Christian university, but several Christian universities. And he spent actually nearly a decade in radio, which is where I first met him back when we used to crank the thing to get the transmitter.
Gerbils running around in a cage.
Exactly. But he spent like over 3 decades now really working in technology. And in recent years, he served as the chief academic officer, provost. Is that a French word? What does that mean? Does that mean
provost.
Like you're a provost? Is that
all
old?
It means is you don't know what the heck you're doing.
Yeah, it means you're old. It's something like a dean or something. I don't know, only maybe one step down. And then he's also a department chair of several universities, again, multiple universities. He holds a degree in IT, which I refer to as IT. And his
doctorate, no less.
He's got a doctorate. And his degree includes a lot of post-grad work with Stanford and Berkeley. All this is the computer science. And then Rick also enjoys woodworking. And I didn't know, but he just got off his airplane a little while ago. He likes to fly, and he likes to spend time with his wife, and he likes to go for walks. So Rick, thank you so much for being with us today. How are you?
Very fine, thank you.
All right, good. How long have you been flying an airplane?
Well, it's an interesting story. I worked on my license 20 years ago. I flew solo in 1998, and then I had to, well, I didn't have to, but it was an opportunity to do consulting in Hawaii with the federal government, working for the military. And my wife found out that you could see sharks in the water when you were on final at Honolulu International. So she said, no, you're not flying. And then when I got home, I didn't continue. And so I picked it up just a couple of months ago and soloed last week again for the second time. And I should probably have my full license by the end of May or June.
All right. I'm not too far from Marana Regional Airport. I live up here by Gladden Farms, and sometimes those guys fly over my house, and I shake my fist at them. But all right, so Rick and I go back a long ways. Go ahead.
Can you fly privately to Hawaii from the mainland?
Well,
I would think
no. I won't say that. Probably you could on a private, what they call a private ticket. If you had the right kind of airplane, yes. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't attempt it. I mean, you'd have to have a jet or something like that. But there is a gentleman I know. He's got a Cessna. It's a fairly decent size Cessna, but it's not a dual. And he's flying from New York to Switzerland sometime later in the year. So he's going to fly to Greenland, and Greenland over to England, and then to Switzerland.
Wow. That's amazing. All right. So as I've alluded to earlier, Rick and I have known each other for a long time. Christian radio, Christian broadcasting, we both have been involved in, and it's a pleasure to have you, Rick. So Rick, we're going to talk, since you have a degree, a doctorate in IT, let's talk a little bit about this. and how it relates to ministry, how it relates to the church. Now, I pulled up some stat from like years ago. I think it was like back in 2011. The people at Tyndale University College and Seminary said 35% of leaders back then believed churches were too focused on technology. But of course, here we are in 2021, and of course, the pandemic and everything. The attitude, I think, has changed for many leaders. You teach technology. Has the attitude within Christian leaders are they embracing technology more? I mean, they probably don't have a choice, but are people still dragging their heels? Are they kicking and screaming? What's your take on this?
Probably the most significant event to drive technology into the ministry is the COVID-19
Yes.
pandemic. But it has been coming for a long time. So there have been some what I would call thresholds, benchmarks, historical moments. Probably the first one that began to cause ministry, not necessarily churches, but ministry to think technology, was when satellite distribution of radio programs became clearly the future. Many ministries were switching over instead of sending out tapes, old magnetic tapes, reel to reel, and cassette tapes. They started to use technology in the form of satellite delivery. That wasn't significant to churches. It might have been to ministries such as Moody Radio and others. But I think the two things that have driven the church to the technology table, obviously COVID-19. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the other is the web itself, and the ability to do fundraising online. Many churches still take a collection on a Sunday morning, but I would imagine, and this is just anecdotal data now, and hey, come on, I'm an academician. I teach doctoral students, and I always say, when I don't really have the data, anecdotally, I would say many churches have started to approach 50% of their giving by online operations. The church parishioners don't write a check anymore. They don't bring cash to drop in the collection plate. They go online and they make their weekly or semi-monthly or monthly offering donation through an online venue. That's huge, and it's just going to continue to grow. Now, the real significant moment, of course, was back in March of last year. It was interesting to watch. Now, you have to realize my background involves how the internet delivers information. I've worked with the military. I've helped them train soldiers on how to set up huge networks. So I know how the backbone of the internet works, and I understand routing, how routers work, and how data moves around the internet. I really did think there was going to be major collapses of the internet when COVID-19 hit. That did not happen. There were sporadic outages, and I won't even use the term outage. I would say it was just delays, annoying delays of video or audio that took place over the first 6 months of the pandemic. And that was as people were forced into using technology, having to work from home, and churches not being able to meet. And sometimes it wasn't just that they couldn't meet, but a lot of the parishioners didn't want to go because they were fearful. So what does the church do? Well, you got to do something. And one of them was, hey, let's use the internet. Well, most of them didn't know how to use the internet. Some of them were sold a bill of goods on, organizations jumped on this. Let's look at Zoom as an example. When Zoom first started to pick up all this extra business because of COVID-19, no security, Zoom was not ready. there were all kinds of things going on that they just weren't prepared for. Now they fixed all those things, or most of them, but churches didn't know how to use all that technology, and there was a learning curve. Now it's interesting, and I might add, and I'll stop and let you ask any questions you have. But now this has changed a little bit, and I'll explain why in a moment. But for a little while during the first half of this past of the COVID situation, it's been a year. So during that first half, up until September, October, if you went online on a Sunday morning to do something such as stream video, or you wanted to check your bank account, or you were going to buy something online, there were times that there were delays, significant delays. Now, those delays may not have meant much to most people, but I knew they were there. And the reason was Sunday morning was the most significant use of streaming weekly because of churches using the internet.
Yeah, we know.
Now, in September of this past year, there were actually outages on the internet, and that was driven by students being told, stay home, but come to school online. And there were actually some outages on the East Coast that took out the internet for several hours because there was an overload that they weren't prepared. The internet companies weren't prepared for the overload as schools started to go online. Churches also, by the way, became more savvy in how they delivered the content, who they used to deliver the content, etc. And so Sunday mornings started to become less of a what I call a bandwidth hog, and that's not a derogatory statement toward churches. It's just the reality of the situation.
So as churches were hesitant to adopt this technology, what are the primary reasons for them to drag their feet? I mean, COVID obviously kind of said, well, you're going whether you want to or not. What are some of the primary reasons you think that churches had kind of held back?
Well, some churches were ready. I mean, there were. So there's a church here in Tucson, not necessarily a what I would call necessarily a internet ready church, but they were already doing some of their services, delivering material on the internet to what has sometimes been called the shut-in population, those who just can't get out physically to go to church. There were a few like that, but a lot of churches, the big problem was, one, very few people in the church understood technology well enough to be able to implement it well. Mm-hmm. And two, equipment-wise, they weren't ready. So as an example, many churches initially, and where I go to church, initially the pastor did a Sunday service that was done live in his backyard. Well, there were some technology issues there, always got that problem. You're getting used to things, but that was when nobody was able to show up initially. Then as the rules, we won't necessarily call them laws, but rules changed a little bit, and you could meet, this particular church started to meet outdoors. Well, the outdoor area where they met was not right next to the sanctuary, the auditorium. And so they ran into issues with issues with what I call bandwidth right on the property, and equipment that wasn't really ready for that kind of usage. And it took them a little while to get their stride. Most churches struggled just to figure out what to do, to purchase equipment, because many of them didn't have cameras. If they did, they weren't very good cameras. And so there was a run on cameras, video cameras. It took them a little while to get their mojo on. And as they did, the quality got better. Bandwidth issues weren't quite as big of a deal. Some of them got quite good at what they did. Now, let me jump over to another partial point here, and that is that many meetings that are held during the week, they aren't church services, but they're meetings. A good example, my wife and I are involved in a Thursday evening prayer meeting, and that prayer meeting met at the church on Thursday night for 1 hour. When this all broke loose, of course, I do this. I've been working online in education for 11 years, full time. So I've been working from home for 11 years. People say, how are you faring the pandemic? Ha! Are you kidding me? I've been doing this for a long time. This is no big deal. In fact, I probably got out more during the pandemic than I did before the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's relatable for us. Yeah.
Huh?
I think it's relatable for both of us,
Yeah.
and Steve as well.
Well, there were some weeks where
Yeah.
I worked in my office at home. This is my home office, a little cluttered because that's, hey, a professor, come on, you got to have junk everywhere or you're not a professor. And I wouldn't leave my property except to go to church on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
Hey, real quick, let me ask you a question. Let me jump in here and interrupt you. You said when this all started that you were concerned that the internet might collapse.
Mhm.
And I remember Steve and I back, I think it was like March 15th, we were talking, in 2020, and I think we were discussing, is this an epidemic or is it a pandemic? But I was concerned myself. I wondered what was going to happen here. You were concerned. Why didn't it totally fail?
And I have the answer to that. So in the mid 90s to late 90s to very early 2000s, there were investors and finance investment companies that were laying fiber cable in the ground for quote unquote the future. A lot of that cable that got put in the ground, you have to realize these are bundled fiber optic cables that could handle, and I use some terminology that some people are used to, gigabits of data. But to be quite frank, they didn't realize that this would eventually pay off. And I have heard anecdotally through some friends that work in the industry that a lot of those, what they call dark fiber cables, have been lit up now. They're using them. Now, some of this, you have to realize, there was preparation for this, not knowing the pandemic was coming, because industry realized that there was a outcry for streaming movies, TV shows, video. People want to watch movies on demand, and a lot of that is through digital streaming. And so the industry was kind of keeping up with that, seeing it coming. That's the beauty. I'll say it. It's the beauty of capitalism. You're looking for investments. You see something in the future and you jump on it. And I will add, as funny as this may sound, the Santa Fe, is it the Santa Fe? Union Pacific Railroad saw this coming, and the ownership has railroad tracks with right-of-way across America. And they were digging trenches along the railroad tracks right here in Tucson for a while, dropping several bundles of these fiber optic cables in the ground with the anticipation that some point down the road, they would be selling those channels, those electronic channels. And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
And because they did that in the 90s and early 2000s, not knowing what was coming, the United States was ready for it. Now, I will tell you, I have friends in India that has not gone as well for other countries where they weren't prepared, and there were outages on a regular basis. And I don't mean little flickers. I mean full outages, sometimes for long periods of time. The United States didn't go through that because we were, without really realizing what was going to happen, prepared.
Wow, that's interesting. I never knew that.
Think of, let me give you an idea of the extent of what goes on the internet. In a given second, every single second of the day, 250 emails traverse the internet. Every single second.
Now, you're not just talking about my email, right? You're talking about...
I'm talking about email floating all over the world.
Okay, all right.
Now, if we took all of the data, everything that is accumulable, everything, as of about a year or so ago, and we wanted to take all of that data, we're talking about emails, we're talking about church podcasts, we're talking about Phil Thompson and Steve Lacy and their data, and anything at all, it doesn't make any difference what it is. and they were to accumulate it all in one place at one time, it would take a 4-story building with hard drives one after another. That 4-story building would take up all of Manhattan Island.
Wow.
They say that by 2040, it shifts around the date, it will no longer fit on Manhattan Island. It will be a 4-story building the size of the state of Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Data is king. It is huge. People don't realize, and this is just, so everything that happens, this podcast at this very moment, the whole image you see on the screen right now is made up of nothing more than zeros and ones that the computer knows what to do with. Yeah. Those 250 million emails are all a bunch of zeros and ones zipping all over the world very, very fast.
So last week we passed a milestone. I don't know if you heard about that or not, but for the first time ever, according to Barna, more people are not part of a church than are part of a church. So that trend has been declining, and it just went below. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you were talking about, if we were looking at demographics, that if you look at that demographic, if I was looking at the young people of the world, there would be, I don't know, 70% or more say they aren't part of a church. And if I look at the demographic, 30% of those are not part of a church. So that tells me the age of the average attender in the church has gone way up. And those are the guys that have the technology challenges as well, right? So we've got those that are really adept are not part of church. How do we go about solving that problem?
Ooh, boy, that's an interesting question. Well, the church has always had its ups and downs and challenges. There's never been a decade, century where the church did not go through all kinds of transitions. I don't know if I really have a full answer to that, but certainly the church needs to embrace the young as well as its traditional congregants. As an example, I remember just a couple of months ago, there was and I'm 68 years old. I've been working with computers since I was 16 years old. So this is 52 years of working with or more of working with computers. And there, I in a Sunday school where there's mostly folks who are retired. I'm not retired. I'm still working full time. But something was said, and it caught my attention. And I said, "Look, we're not the future of the church. You realize all of us could be dead in 10 to 20 years, if not even sooner. And we're not going to be here, and the church has to survive and move on. And so part of that is embracing a younger generation. And part of that is looking at how you do that. Now, God calls us, Christ called us to action. And certainly that action is to be involved. But remember, the church had to go underground during the Roman persecution when the Roman Empire basically outlawed Christianity. And so the church has not always met face to face, or at least not openly. And so what we're seeing right now is it's technology that's allowed the church to change its traditional locations. Now, how do you get the younger people involved? Well, I don't know if I have the full answer to that. Certainly the church, and I think the electronic church of today has got to figure out a couple of things. I mean, preaching is preaching, but how do you deliver good, solid, very well done musical sets? I'll use that term. How do you deliver and work with the kids, the young kids? I mean, mom and dad are listening to a service. What's being done for the kids? I mean, electronically, I haven't heard of any church doing that. I'm sure there are some that have 2 different channels. One channel, you're broadcasting, podcasting the church service to the adults. The other channel, maybe you're doing something for kids. I don't know what that would look like. I'm not a children's minister, but certainly because it's not terribly expensive to do that, the church could expand their capabilities into offering multiple types of services. One for junior high, high school, college and career, as we used to call it, and probably still do in some places. I'm not sure how you do nursery. That would be a real challenge. But our churches taking advantage of multiple channel opportunities to deliver well-produced, well-organized. We'll use the term
Presentation.
Sunday
but
school, something like that.
Yeah, Tony Morgan, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's got his own organization where he consults churches. He used to be executive director, executive pastor at the place over there by Notre Dame. But he was saying that content, people can get content now anytime they want.
Yes.
And people coming back to church, actually going into the facility now, especially now that we're in this pandemic and we're coming out of it, but still, people aren't going to necessarily come for content. They're going to come for the arts. They're going to come for relationships.
Yeah, relationships.
And that was his whole point was, and he was talking about how bringing the arts, which is kind of what you're alluding to here, Rick, I think is, you're not just putting canned presentations together Sunday morning, but you have actually, music that's creative and different things that the church used to do a long time ago in the area of the arts. And I think that will be an answer. That's my opinion anyhow, the arts and relationships, because you can get content. I mean, we got this podcast, it's on audio, it's on video. You can get content anytime, day and night. And it's the same way. You can put your sermons on anytime, but what really brings people together is relationships.
Relationships.
So you're welcome. So there you
hit
go.
on something really important here, Phil. So why did God create man in the first place?
Well, go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, he wanted personal, intimate fellowship. It's like you and I, Phil, over a cup of coffee at a restaurant, talking about our lives, talking about our families, talking about our hurts and our successes, on and on and on. And God desired that. And God had angels, but it wasn't the same. And God decided that, and this probably was, we don't understand God fully. There's just absolutely no way. The older I get, the more I realize I really don't even know who God. I know God, and I know Jesus died on the cross for my sin. But here's the thing. I don't understand the full mind of God, and I won't till I get to heaven. And then I'll spend an eternity trying to figure it out. But the beauty is God knew he wanted someone to share. And so he created man. A relationship, that's what COVID has killed. I won't say killed, but stifled it. And it's hard to get back. Now, let me go back to that prayer meeting thing. So we started to do prayer meeting on Zoom. And one night during this hour-long prayer meeting, we got talking about what we would do when it came time to meet again, face to face. And we said, maybe we won't. Maybe we'll do Zoom and continue it this way. And there were a couple of reasons for that. We actually never lost a real strong, now this is because you had multiple people talking and sharing their lives, and then we pray about each other's needs and so on. Not like a Sunday service where you just see a talking head, but this was people talking and interacting with each other. And we found that we actually didn't feel like we lost much during the prayer time. Now that's a little unusual. We realized that we and I hate to say it, but we saved time. We didn't have to drive to the church and didn't drive home. Some people who couldn't do that were now joining the prayer meeting. Yeah. So there are some advantages to the electronic medium that makes it maybe more doable for some activities spiritually. But like you said, I will say our church has started to meet face to face, and you should see the smiling faces. They can't wait to get to each other and shake their hand and talk to each other. They missed that for the last year. So there's give and take in this whole electronic thing.
All right. So we're out of time here, but as we would say in radio, 30 seconds, Rick. What do you think is going to happen once we come out of this pandemic? Do you think things will change, or do you think they'll stay the same as they were? What do you think is going to happen?
I think that churches will start to meet again, but I think they're not going to abandon what technology they've learned to use. It will benefit them. Now, one thing that has happened is churches are finding they have new people joining them, and they're coming to the service online, but they aren't coming to the on-ground service, and they're getting some people who are coming from other states to their church, if you will, electronically. Of course, church hopping or church shopping has been a big deal during the pandemic. But I think that a lot of churches will continue to embrace the technology because, hey, they've already invested in it. Why not continue to do it? And now they have two channels to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Rick Livingood has been our guest. Now, Rick, how can people get a hold of you? I mean, I know if somebody wanted to reach out to you and had a question or something, I'm sure you'd be willing to at least give them a little advice. How can people get a hold of you?
I'll give you an email that if anything happens, it's one that I don't care what happens to it. There's a few of them I hold very close because they're for my students and that kind of thing. But I've had one for years. It's Rick L, RICKL at the number one, HAND, I do have both hands, .net. So onehand.net, Rick L at onehand.net. And it's the numeral one, HAND .net.
Where did you get that? Where did that come from?
That came from, if you're familiar, years ago, I did a radio broadcast called Firsthand Radio.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I remember
and by the way, the claim to fame was Firsthand Radio was the gentleman who started that broadcast had a special guest, very similar to what we're doing right now. That special guest had just written a book. And the guy who started Firsthand Radio was interviewing him. And when they got all done, the guy said to him, "How do you get into radio? This just looks like a great ministry." The gentleman who asked that question was Dr. James Dobson.
Oh, wow.
So Firsthand Radio got Dr. Dobson into radio back in the late 80s, early late 80s.
Yeah, it was early 80s, I think. But yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I actually spoke to him one time. And he never would talk to me again. But anyhow, that's very common. All right, well, we're way out of time here, but Rick, it's good to reconnect with you. You and I go back a ways, and we sure appreciate your insight here. Dr. Rick Livingood has been our guest today on the Church Solutions podcast. And Rick, since we do live in the same town, we should get together one of these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. All right. Good.
Blessings on everybody.
Yeah.
All right.
God bless.
Thanks, Rick. Thank you, Rick. And thank you, Steve Lacy, for being with us today as well. Appreciate you. And most of all, thank you, our viewers and the listeners to the Church Solutions podcast. Please take care of yourselves. We'll catch you again next time.